Greetings and welcome to another edition of Montpelier Connection. I'm State Representative Mike Mrowicki from Putney, and I represent the Windham 4 District of Putney, Dummerston, and Westminster, along with Representative David Dean. We're getting ready for the 2016 legislative session. Yes, it's hard to believe, it's coming up fast. And as we try and do every year, we bring in the local legislators, and luckily we have Representative Mollie Burke here today. Welcome.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
Thank you for hosting.
Just so people who don't know have a little bit of a better sense of who you represent, there's 3 districts in Brattleboro.
Correct.
And which district do you represent?
I represent District 2, which is, most of the district is on the other side of the brook, over Hospital, High School, South Main, but a little bit on the other side of the brook where I live.
Okay.
And it's
Flat Street?
Flats, part of Flat Street, you know, well, no, not, well, it gets very complicated there, so I have to think of it. Things change as you head downtown. There's one side of Frost Street is in my district, one side is in Representative Tolino's district, so there's a little bit of, I have to look carefully.
Well, Brattleboro's geographically a big town and, you know, the largest town in our county, so.
Well, the nice thing is that because each representative represents about 4,000 people, the population of Brattleboro of 12,000, we sort of fit neatly into 3 legislative districts, so it makes it a little bit sort of nice and tidy.
And in other places, it doesn't fit in so well. That's why David Dean and I share a district of 3 towns. Mm-hmm. And around Vermont, some people represent
6 or 7 towns.
Yes.
So makes it a little hard during campaign season. I could walk to every place in my district.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And as a comparison, you said each of us represents around 4,000 people. An old high school acquaintance was just elected to the New Jersey legislature. Whoa. And each one of the people in the assembly there, the representatives, represents 100,000 people.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I can't imagine it. I love Vermont because we know a lot of our constituents. There's a very direct connection.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the best parts of Vermont's citizen legislature.
And I think that's what makes it a very civil kind of institution.
Yeah. Now, we're a part-time citizen legislature. We all, or most of us, need paying jobs outside of the legislature. What is it that you do outside the legislature?
Well, I am a visual artist, and I used to teach at several schools in the area, but I founded in 2008, I founded a nonprofit organization called Art in the Neighborhood, which brings tuition-free art classes to children in low-income housing communities in Brattleboro. So I am the founder, director. I teach, I hire other people to teach, I order supplies. Mainly I'm writing grants right now because in order to keep an organization going, one needs to have money. Yep. But it's very rewarding, and I really like to we go into the community, we work in community rooms, and we also this fall just started working with healthcare and rehabilitative services. So we work with children who are clients of HCRS, Healthcare Rehabilitative Services, mental health agency. Yeah. So it works pretty well with my job in the legislature, and thankfully email makes it a lot easier. I can sort of direct from Montpelier and be in touch with people, and I have a great staff. So
that's great. Yeah. Now, speaking of the past legislature, many of us feel good about a lot of what we did. The last guest we had was Tristan Tolino, and he was talking about something carrying over the paid sick leave bill. What were the highlights for you of the last session?
Well, I think that, I'm on the Transportation Committee, so that's something that I'm very interested in, promoting other forms of transportation, so we're not completely dependent on our vehicles. And one of the great things is that that is in alignment with the goals of the administration to promote safe bicycling, pedestrian. We have a pretty good, a very good transit system in Vermont. It's not perfect, but all of the areas of the state are covered in some way. because of dispersed population, it's really hard to have, a really, buses going all the time. But we are covered, and that's great. We have rail service through the state. There's a great interest in expanding all those other options so that people are not just dependent on cars for health reasons, environmental reasons, and just creating a more diverse system. So I would say that it's a real pleasure to work with the administration on those issues.
And speaking of rail service, there was some exciting news this past summer about expansion.
Right. We've got a grant to fix up some rail that will help make the train get from Rutland to Burlington. And now there's rail service in the state. People may know that there's one train a day that goes through Brattleboro. It starts out in Washington, D.C. and ends in St. Albans. There's a train on the western side of the state that goes up from New York through Albany, up through New York State and into Rutland and stops there. And there has been great interest, many studies over the years, to get this train up to Burlington, which would make it many more people would be taking that train. And then the ultimate goal is to also get it Albany, Bennington, Rutland, Burlington. Because Bennington feels very left out in terms of they have no interstate, they have no train. Bus service has been very limited there in the past several years. Now there is better bus service because the state is now subsidizing bus service on that side of the state. So I think it's a pretty exciting time in terms of transportation. Dollars are always an issue. There's some funding studies going on right now around how do we pay for our transportation system given declining gas prices, et cetera. But in terms of the overall sort of vision of a transportation system, it's very exciting. It's very exciting for me to be part of that.
There was a time, I remember, when that train that came through Brattleboro was called the Montrealer. Any news on that?
Well, that came through Brattleboro at 3 a.m, and I remember that well because at that time, my husband and I were living in an apartment downtown on the river, and
so you heard
the train come through. But there have been talks. Because the train stops in St. Albans because they don't want to do on-track immigration, custom on the track. Now they do it in other places, but whatever. And there've been talks in place to talk with the government of Quebec and talks with the other Amtrak line that runs through the Adirondack that runs through New York State to build a secure immigration facility in Montreal. And, about 5 years ago, they were saying, oh, it's going to be 3 years, and now it's sort of out. But I'm sort of hopeful that with the new Canadian government, that there will be a little bit more movement in that direction in terms of realizing the economic benefits for Canadians and for Americans. If the terminus of the train is Montreal rather than St. Albans, we are going to get so many more riders. It's going to benefit Brattleboro because people may get off here and say, hey, I'm going to spend a day in this town on my way to Montreal, or vice versa. We'll have a lot of Canadians traveling south. So I think that I'm very hopeful that this will happen pretty soon. But there are a lot of logistics.
That would be wonderful. I remember reading something when Justin Trudeau was elected PM in Canada that his plan was to bolster their economy by investing in infrastructure.
Well, this is what we need to do. This is what other countries have done. We were just met some Europeans, some Germans, and talking about their transportation system. And we are really behind in terms of what our country in general. I think there's been an unwillingness to invest in infrastructure, but as we know, investing in infrastructure creates economic opportunity.
You bet it does. And other countries are doing it because interest rates are so low now. This is the time to do it. So it's been very short-sighted, again, by our the Washington.
Right, but Vermont has the right. Vermont has invested, and I think under the leadership of former Secretary Sue Minter, who's now running for governor, And now, Chris Cole, there's a real awareness about how to keep up our bridges, make sure that we're not falling behind. I think they've been fabulous, visionary heads of the Agency of Transportation.
Yeah, I agree. Now, you mentioned before, one of the challenges we're facing is how do we continue to pay for repairing our roads, replacing bridges? The dilemma is we've relied just on the per gallon gasoline tax, and people are driving less. That's a good thing. People are driving more fuel efficient cars. That's a good thing.
And electric vehicles.
And electric vehicles. And what happens though is people using less fuel, then the revenues are going to be less, and they're not meeting what we need to keep up right now. Is that true?
That's absolutely true, and there's a study going on that the Agency of Transportation is doing. They will be presenting to the legislature, I think probably in January, about options for how can we pay for our transportation system. I think they're just going to look at all different options. There's some, Oregon has tried out a vehicle miles traveled tax, so you would pay for the miles you drive. That would include, a lot of people say, well, people who drive electric vehicles don't pay for the roads, so that would help with that problem. There are, I think, a variety of ways that of options that they're going to come up with, and I think the legislature is really going to have to take some of those options seriously. We can't continue to just find out that, oh, our revenues every month we get the revenues, or every 3 months, and you see, oh my gosh, the funds are down and we're going to have to cut this project and that, and that's not a way to run a transportation system.
No,
So.
I mean, I think we're trying to backfill a lot of neglect on our roads and bridges, and I think Governor Shumlin has done a wonderful job.
He's done a really, really great job.
We had an extraordinary amount of our bridges that were, I think, in a pretty bad condition, and I think done great progress there.
Yeah.
There's some talk about a carbon tax to look at. Would this tie into what you're talking about?
Well, I'm not sure how, there are a couple of different proposals for carbon tax. I support a carbon tax because the proposal for a carbon tax is to then lessen other taxes and it's thinking about how do we pay now or do we pay later for the pollution that's happening, for the carbon that we're sending into the atmosphere. And a lot of actually, people whom you wouldn't think would support a carbon tax actually do support it because it is an economically viable thing to do. That we'll see what happens. There are a couple of bills that are out there that I'm hoping there'll be some movement on this session. And I think it's really the prudent thing to do. Again, a lot of times people run away from the idea of tax. What is a tax? And if you look at, all right, well, what are the benefits of this tax? And what are what happens if we don't impose a tax? What's going to happen down the line? So are we going to be able to look long-term at things, or are we going to be able to just look in the short term? Oh, or I'm afraid to vote for a tax because I'm afraid people won't like it. And I think in that sense, it's not just taxing for the sake of, oh, we want more and more and more. It's looking at a situation like the situation with the climate change and how do we cut our greenhouse gas emissions, and saying, well, all right, the theory is you tax the bad and you encourage the good. So you take that money that you're taxing and you put it into reimbursing people who are burdened by the tax. You put it into other kinds of sources of transportation.
And tax relief.
And tax relief, exactly. So I'm pretty excited about a carbon tax.
Wow.
And I think that it might take some educating of people to realize it's not just adding on to what people feel is an already heavy tax burden. It's shifting what's being taxed and lessening other kinds of taxes.
And some people I've talked to have mentioned it in regard to an overall retooling of our tax system, that our tax system really needs to be brought into the 21st century, and And along with other pieces, that could be a vital part of that.
And taxes issues are always complicated, very complicated.
Yep. Go back to what I think Oliver Wendell Holmes said, though, that taxes are the price we pay for a civilized society.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, there's a lot to think about right now about civilized society and what, thinking about Paris and what happened there and what kind of a society do we want to be. And one of the things you're hearing about is that everybody in Paris is so united and people are opening their doors and, people who couldn't get home that night. And I think that that same kind of sense of community is what, okay, well, maybe we're going to have a tax that's going to, maybe some people are going to pay a little more, some people are going to pay a little less, but we are a community. We're not just a collection of individuals.
That's right.
And so.
It's been said by many people that Hurricane Irene, Tropical Storm Irene, was one of our finer moments because we did come together and were able to accomplish a lot. I think it's a point well taken. So here we are looking at the 2016 legislative session on our horizon, and it's coming fast. Big picture, are there ideas that you're hoping we're gonna work on, and then going down to the committee level, are there ideas, and also are you hearing from constituents about specific ideas they'd like to see us work on?
Well, I think, looking at big picture, I think that, first of all, I'm thinking this is going to be my 8th year in the legislature, and that sort of astounds me. Mm-hmm. And you're already what, 2 years ahead of me, or 4? Can't remember. Yeah. So it's a privilege to be there and to be working on issues and complex issues and things that take a long time, but still, I see how it's been how sort of transitions and how thinking gets happen and how people get on board with particular ideas. So big picture, I guess I'm just hoping that we can figure out how to continue to support the neediest among us in the face of budget challenges. And I think there was the issue that was around cuts to benefits and things like that are really big issues. You're on the Human Service Committee, you grapple with that all the time. My hope is that we can come up with a budget that we're all proud of, and that somehow figures out how we can help people without making people dependent, how we can, big thing is cutting the prison population. There was just something that came out from the governor's office around how the projections for how many prisons were going to be in Vermont were way down. So we're saving money that way. If we can really invest in mental health services, if we can invest in things that will make it not make us not have to spend lots of money further down the road. I mean, that's sort of what I was talking about with the carbon tax too. And I think with the incarceration issue and with early childhood too, you invest at the beginning so that you don't have to pay for problems that arise that could have been prevented.
Investing in Vermont.
Invest in Vermont, invest in people, invest in positive things, invest in giving people good education, invest in helping people who are, for whatever reason, are not able to help themselves.
Yeah, you bet. One of the reasons I work in human services, and I appreciate being on the Human Services Committee, I feel one of our most important duties is to be a voice for those that don't have a voice, the elderly, the disabled, young children. These people really depend on the kindness of their neighbors. And it's one of the important things we do.
And it's true also, though. I mean, the middle class people feel, it's hard when it gets into middle class people feeling that they're stretched, and that why should they have to pay for people who are, less fortunate. They're feeling it too, and I think that that's the kind of situation that we have in our country with the sort of squeezing of the middle class. And how do we bring everybody up? How do we
Sure.
bring the middle class up so that people who are working feel like they're working and getting ahead?
Yeah.
How do we help people who are needy to get the services they need so that they can transition into jobs? You know, then it gets into job creation and a lot of
Yeah.
other things.
Are there specifics that you're going to be working on this year that you've already heard about?
Yes, one specific thing is that you probably know that during this past year there have been 4 bicycle fatalities in the state of Vermont with vehicles. And one of the families of one of the victims came to the governor and said, we really need to do something more about this. We can't just throw up our hands and say, oh, this is terrible. And so a meeting was convened at VTrans. I attended, along with representatives of the Governor's Highway Safety Council, VTrans heads, and also Representative Willem Jewett, who's on the Judiciary Committee. So then there was a rally in Montpelier to talk about safe riding, safety for pedestrians, safety for vehicles, everything. And the outcome of that is there going to be some legislation that is going to target stiffer penalties for drunken driving, because in the case of one of the victims was one of the drivers that hit one of the victims had been drinking. But it gets into complications about drunken driving laws. So there's going to be some legislation that's going to go through the Judiciary Committee and the Transportation Committee. For transportation, there are going to be certain stipulations. For example, about 2010, I sponsored a bill that was called the Safe Passing Bill, which meant that a car needed to increase clearance and use caution when passing a vulnerable user. Vulnerable being a person in a wheelchair, a person on a horse, a person walking, a person riding a bicycle, on roller skis, whatever. And the distance was not stipulated for various reasons. So that's going to get a little bit straightened up, and some other things about what are the rights of bicyclists in terms of taking the lane when there's not enough shoulder, things like that. So this is going to be a comprehensive bill that's going to try to deal with safety. At the same time, the state Governor's Highway Safety Council is doing a lot of public service announcements around, I mean, you've probably seen some of these around Brattleboro, these signs that say, you know, this
I'm a
person
baker
on
and
a
a
bicycle is your
Yeah.
sister or your mother or your, you know, this is your local
Yeah.
doctor, or this is, so that to try to personalize that I think that we have there's a lot of blindness to people sort of assuming that the roads are for cars and everybody else is sort of, and we all need to really pay attention. And I think being on this committee has really made me aware of how the responsibility, huge responsibility of getting behind the wheel of a car. And also pedestrians have responsibilities. We need to use crosswalks, not dart out. I'm very aware of that now. And bicyclists have responsibilities to act like a car, stop at stop signs, stop at traffic signals. And you see a lot of ignoring of those kind of rules, or people just are not aware of them.
Yeah.
So we all need to, it's sort of part of that whole sense of community I was talking about. We're a community on the roads, and we need to respect each other and each other's right to be there, and just not be in such a hurry about getting places, leave a little early, you know, to get rid of the sort of, sometimes you go, oh, I just have to go a little faster because I'm 2 minutes late, so.
As a bicycler who rides in Brattleboro often, I've certainly had those experiences, those close calls, and it's not fun, and it makes me try and be more aware, and I would hope drivers could be more aware of the bicycles, because the roads are narrow enough here. There's not a lot of room sometimes, and we like to feel bicyclists have a right to be on the roads just as much as cars.
And need to obey the rules. And
obey
I
the
know it
rules,
really drives some drivers that get really upset with bicyclists because they're not.
Yeah.
And that's something we also need to acknowledge, that it's a.
Totally agree. And I also remind people as well, when they point that out to me, though, that there have been no car fatalities from bicyclists.
Right. No bicyclists ever run into a car.
That's right. So I think the onus, when you're driving a vehicle that could weigh a couple of tons, the
Yeah.
onus is on you. We got a couple of minutes left. Are there other things that you're looking at? I know a lot of people in Brattleboro have been asking me about the legalization of recreational use of marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you're hearing about?
I haven't heard about it so much from constituents, although there is a gathering this Friday up in Bellows Falls of some people from prevention organizations to talk about it. So I'm open to hearing what people have to say. From what I have heard right now, I think that sort of comparing this to prohibition, I think that we have so many people in prison now because of, well, now we decriminalize small amounts of marijuana, but I think that we need to recognize that this is a substance that people are using. And alcohol is a dangerous substance, but regulated, well regulated, not used in excess is a perfectly, you go out and have a beer with somebody. And to think about marijuana in that same way, that we need to educate people about the harmful effects. We need to keep it away from youth, have just the same way that alcohol, you have to be 21 to use alcohol. So I'm in favor of proceeding with, and seeing what the legislation is going to say and but I think that it's sort of a moving ahead in terms of people's awareness.
Yeah.
That just sort of making it illegal has not really worked.
Yeah.
It's certainly not stopped people from using it.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Well, one thing I did want to say, one more, is that I'm a co-chair of the Women's Legislative Caucus, and we had a conference in October about trying to think about women's economic security.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we work on, because if women are economically secure, then their families are more economically secure. And then maybe there's, less need for services and so that's one of the things that we work on, and specifically we work on that and the specific issues of women, incarcerated women, and how do we get them services they need so that people aren't just returning to prison because they can't meet their conditions of probation and things like that. So that's just another area of interest. And in general, I think that I want to see, people have specific problems. It's also very nice to be able to say, oh, I'm going to call up this person and maybe I can sort of be of help to somebody on a specific issue. So,
well, I think that's one of the most important things we do is
constituent service.
Constituent service. So people want to get in touch with you. How would they go about that?
Well, they can call me at my home, 802-257-4844. You can email me at mburke, B-U-R-K-E, at leg.state.vt.us.
And that's, especially during the session, that's probably the best way to get a hold of us.
Exactly. Yeah. Not at home, because we're not at home most of the week anyway.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Mike. It's
And,
always a pleasure, and thank you for doing this.
Yeah. Well, I think it's another part of how we can help our constituents know what we're doing, and please get in touch with us. This is the time when we're getting ready, and we want to hear from you with questions, suggestions, and all your comments. We know that the collective wisdom of all our constituents will help us do our work better.
It's very important that we hear from constituents, because otherwise we're sort of operating in a vacuum.
Yeah, you bet.
So.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you again to all the folks here at VCTV for helping bring our work to you at home. And as we move forward, as Mollie and I just said, please be in touch. And until next time, this is Mike Mrowicki. Take care. Bye-bye now.